Hello, and welcome to Ontology Explained. I'm Casey Hart, philosopher and ontologist, and this video was a long time in the making. A year ago, I started this quest to define artificial intelligence, and we've completed it. If this is the first video that you're watching on my channel, hey, welcome. Nice to have you here. You might want to start at the beginning of the series, although it's fine. You can start with just this one. But the background is I had a whole bunch of things that I want to say about artificial intelligence and ontology and philosophy. And I thought, let's start with the basics. Let's do the easy problem, just define what AI is. And then that will be a jumping off point for all these other things. And what I discovered was that's a really freaking hard problem. So, what's our plan? I'm going to give you my answer. Kinda? Because I can't just give you my answer because I actually have three answers. And do I feel great about that? No, but I think that's the best that we can do given the myriad ways that artificial intelligence as a term is used. So answers 1, 2, and 3, and since I give you three answers, then we're going to come back around and talk about, okay, what does it mean to have three answers? How can I balance those together and make sense of the fact that some people just talk about AI simplicator, given that I think there are three understandings, how do we make sense of that? But let's go one at a time, and let's start with the core one, which is that artificial intelligence is a discipline. Artificial intelligence is the discipline dedicated to creating non-biological minds. And like any other academic discipline, it sort of sits next to other areas of study. It overlaps with computer science first and foremost, and psychology and philosophy and mathematics and engineering. And depending on how your university wants to split up things, maybe there's cognitive science on this list somewhere, maybe statistics is on there. But don't think of AI as the objects in and of themselves, first and foremost. Think of it as the area of study dedicated to creating non-biological minds. And now, why do I use non-biological in this? Well, the story goes something like this. Look, humans, we got minds. And animals, at least some of them, they also have minds. So can we make computers that have them too? That is broadly the conversation that's going on at the birth of the field of artificial intelligence. Now, I considered using some other terms besides non-biological, maybe like the creation of non-human minds or created minds or machine minds or computer minds. And all of those are maybe okay. But of course, we can create minds, and we do create minds all the time. I have 3 kids, so procreation is a way to make minds, but that's not what folks in artificial intelligence are interested in. They're interested in building those minds in some sort of like non-natural, artifactual sort of way. So why do I pick a discipline first and foremost as the central way to understand AI? And mostly, as I went through all of the definitions I considered, all of the thinkers fall under this. Turing and the 1956 DARPA folks and John Haugland, they are all interested in a field of research for the creation of non-biological minds. What does that look like? How can we tell when we've actually created them? How does this fit into various academic traditions? And so thinking about AI as a discipline is just a natural starting point, I think. And it does a good job of capturing the current practice. How are people actually building AI today? OpenAI and folks like that are talking about building artificial superintelligence and general intelligence. What they are trying to do is understand how we can build a non-biological mind. Now, we can object to this definition in at least a couple of ways. And first is just that when you look at what current practice is, like if I go interview somebody at OpenAI, maybe they're not saying that they're trying to create a mind. And if they're not saying that they're trying to create a mind, then by what means do I think that AI should be defined as the discipline of trying to create non-biological minds? But in order to have a field, you don't need every person to be trying to accomplish the overarching aim of that field, right? So it doesn't matter that not every individual AI researcher is trying to build a mind, but they're doing pieces of it that would fit together to maybe help generate a mind at the end, right? If we look at every biologist, they're not always trying to create life, even though it's the study of life or something, but they might look at a particular protein and they are focused on some building block of life, something that's related to life. So even the AI researchers and professionals that are not actively trying to build a mind themselves, you can understand what they're doing derivatively from how it relates to the creation of a non-biological mind. The other problem with this definition is, and I talked about this in the 1956 DARPA video, so my second definition for AI, is that this is great for defining a field, but we're not interested just in a field. The ostensive definition I gave for artificial intelligence is the thing that is the Terminator and Netflix recommendations and chess bots and ChatGPT, and those things aren't fields of study, those are objects. So what do you do about that? And I think that's right. And I think that's fine. And that's why we've got multiple definitions for artificial intelligence. So let's go to the second one. Artificial intelligence 2. Artificial intelligence are just non-biological minds. And in a way, this feels a little bit like a cop-out, especially if you watch my third video on this series, because that's John Haugland's answer. And I say that I have some issues with John Haugland's answer. Now, I don't need to accept all of his philosophical trajectory. He does some simplifications of how we can understand Hobbes and Locke and Hume and such. And while in broad strokes, I think that was fine, I don't need to accept exactly that picture, nor do I have to think that AI is the built up of good old-fashioned artificial intelligence. It can be machine learning or a number of other things. So I'm not adopting that here necessarily. I'm basically staying neutral on those commitments. But I do like his definition that AI is a mind in the full and complete sense. And I think that's right. That at its core, the discipline of artificial intelligence, which is my primary understanding of it, is the quest to build non-biological minds. And those non-biological minds themselves are artificial intelligence. I think that's good. And we don't need to know exactly what the minds are or what that procedure is going to be like to know that that is the general target. And the metaphor I use here is thinking about calculus. So we got a picture up there, right, in the upper corner of an integral. And before they knew how to do integration, they could draw curves and say there's an area under the curve. And they could even come up with a symbol for it and say this integral symbol stands for the area under the curve of that function. The point is, you can start out with a conceptual understanding of what's going on and define the field and the entities around that, even if we don't have anything that actually realizes that definition yet. The problem remains unsolved. And this is how I think about artificial intelligence as objects. These minds, these real non-biological minds, they don't exist yet. We don't have them, but we know-ish what they look like because humans have minds, and those are the kinds of things that we're trying to build a non-biological version of. If I do adopt this definition for my second definition, I should contend with the objections that I brought up to Haugland's view in that video earlier in the series. So let's take a look at those. The first problem that I brought up with Haugland's definition was that on his view, nothing that we currently have would count as artificial intelligence because these things aren't real minds, right? A Netflix recommendation isn't a mind, nor is Stockfish, nor is ChatGPT. So what do I have to say about this objection? I'm cool with that. I have no issue with the fact that we just don't have AI on this view today. Maybe we'll never get this sort of AI. And this is one of the questions that we ask for the quest for artificial general intelligence or whatever. Are we actually going to get a mind? I don't know. I think the jury is still out on that, and that's fine. I can live in that space, and I can still say that these other things that we're going to call AI in like a loose sense are interesting and useful tools, and they've showed up as a result of research on AI, right? So the fact that Netflix recommendations and ChatGPT and Stockfish are products of AI research, the quest for an actual genuine non-biological mind, doesn't mean that we have to call those products themselves non-biological minds, because they're not. Now let's get to that third definition. AI is cool stuff. So I'll define it a little more precisely than cool stuff. Artificial intelligence are things that replicate or improve upon human activities that require intelligence were we to do them. So this has vibes of that 56 DARPA conference, Minsky definition, that we're a human to do what we call intelligence. So if a machine does it, we can say that that machine is artificial intelligence. And there's a continuum here for these sorts of artificial intelligences. It can be the number and variety of tasks that the AI is able to do. This is a narrow versus broad conception of artificial intelligence. It might be the level of intelligence that would be required from a human were they to do it. So this is maybe a weaker versus stronger AI, right? Playing chess is much harder than playing tic-tac-toe. So we can have that kind of continuum involved as well. And you might also have a continuum on how human-like the performance of that task was. And this ties in, of course, to Turing's test. And then we could maybe also have a continuum in terms of the level of autonomy. So you can imagine something that performs a very sophisticated task in a similar way to a human would, maybe in sort of like the verbal output from doing the task, and it would require a lot of intelligence. Yet nonetheless, the tool itself needed to be steered by a human the whole time. You need to say, yes, do the next thing, yes, do the next thing. And that might be a relatively non-autonomous thing, but a very autonomous, very human-like, very intelligent, very broadly construed artificial intelligence. That's something that would be cool stuff that would be maybe very difficult to distinguish from a human. And again, this is a third definition which is distinct from the understanding of AI as a mind in the real sense. So you could have all of these things and maybe still not count it as a mind. That's totally fine. So how can you tell on this view whether something would really count as artificial intelligence? And here I think novelty is really important. So stuff that is new is more likely to be considered artificial intelligence. Now, this is a little bit just my gut here and small sample size of talking to people, but folks are less likely to call a thermostat having AI, even though it's auto-regulating the temperature of my house. Why is that? My theory is that thermostats are not that new, and so they're less interesting or they're more well understood, and so they don't get called AI as much. But ChatGPT, holy smokes, this is new and exciting. I mean, less new today than it was a couple years ago, but these LLMs are cutting edge, and so they're more likely to be called artificial intelligence. And on this theory, and you can watch this video years from now and tell me if I'm right or not, I suspect that chatbots that leverage LLMs are going to be less likely to be called AI in the future because I think they'll be more well understood, they'll be less novel, and so we're just not going to think they're quite as smart as we happen to think that they are today. Another indicator of AI is how much computing is going on. So the more thinking, the more processing power, the more intelligent that it turns out to be. So here I'm just loving thermostat examples today, but the difference between a thermostat that's made of like a piece of metal that either completes or doesn't complete a circuit based on how hot or cool the metal is, right? That feels less smart than something that's running a digital computer on it to decide what the temperature is going to be. So like the more analog or manual it feels, the less likely we are to call it artificial intelligence. And human likeness makes a big difference here. So you see I got the Roomba on the screen, and you might not have called that an AI vacuum. But what about with googly eyes? Is this ridiculous? Yes. Is this actually how people think about things? I think so. And this is maybe the point of the Turing test, right? If you take a chatbot and it says that it is a chatbot and it's a robot and is just providing answers to your questions, you've got something like that. People might not be as willing to call it as smart as if you gave it a tone that felt like you were really conversing with another human. This AI3 definition, I don't like it. I'm worried about it. Because this definition is pretty squishy, and it's broad, and it changes in time, right? Does a Roomba with googly eyes count as AI? And the answer is I'm not entirely sure, right? If it's got enough processing that it vacuums the whole floor and it does some stuff that we think is pretty smart and it feels technologically advanced enough, then some people might call it AI, and I'm cool with that, I guess. But my view here is that I don't like this definition, but it does capture common usage. And this is really what lies at the core of why it's so difficult, right? Is that we've got a bunch of things that we want to call AI, and I just don't think there is a single thing that unifies all of them. And this is important because it makes discussions about artificial intelligence very vulnerable to being hijacked. And I'm going to talk about that more in a second, so I'll just leave the bullet there on this slide, and then we'll get to it in just a minute. So how do we balance all of these different definitions that I've thrown out? And I like to think of it's kind of like a food pyramid. So they're in order of importance, and I want you to freely use and mostly think about AI in terms of the discipline, our AI 1 definition. And then AI 2 is also really important, but probably not as relevant in as many conversations. But that's like a philosophically and theoretically useful thing. This is the target that the discipline of AI is pointing at, creating these non biological minds. The third one, AI 3, as like these new novel technologies that are interesting and do stuff that are smart in the sense that if a human had to do them, the human would be behaving smartly. That I feel like that's fat and oil and sugar. That's at the top. That's like a colloquial, conversational way to talk about AI, but it's not very substantive. And if you spend a lot of your time discussing AI and you just mean that stuff, it's the same as if your diet consisted of a bunch of sugars. It's not going to power you to a healthy understanding of what's going on in artificial intelligence. And here's my plea. Let's limit the use of AI as a term in this third sense, because it's super unclear, and that unclarity is a vulnerability. Because this is exactly how folks like Sam Altman or Elon Musk or Suleiman, these folks leverage the fact that AI is extremely ambiguous as a term. And so, because it could mean potentially the artificial superintelligence, or it could mean just a chess bot that's playing on my phone, or it could mean the smart navigation of my Roomba, I can twist its meaning to be whatever suits me in a particular situation. So I can use it as I'm talking to my investors to say that it will solve all of the world's problems, and I can use it as I talk to regulators to help them build a moat for me to say that it's super dangerous, but I can also use it in other contexts to say that it poses no problems whatsoever because you all have had a Roomba in your house and you're doing just fine. And this makes it sort of a catch-22 for me, though, frankly. I was just talking to another content creator about this today, where I hate the term AI, but if I don't use the term AI, people won't find my channel, and they will just listen to the people who are hyping it and misusing the term. So in a way, this is kind of like, look, I don't like the third definition. I think the first and second definition are much better and we should use them, but I'm still going to use it sometimes in the context of the third one because I got to reclaim the term and make sure that the people who are using it in this reckless way get pulled back a little bit. The other reason why I think it's totally fine to say let's not use the term AI that much is we got options. So instead of saying I worked with AI today, I can say I used ChatGPT, I used an LLM, I used a chatbot. Let's build chatbots that do these sorts of things. I've got chess playing software. I use Stockfish. We don't need to call them AI. And this is especially important not just in like everyday expressions, because of course it's totally fine for me to say, yeah, I use AI all the time for work, and you kind of know what I mean. But it's really important if we do more specific stuff. Like if I'm in the government and I'm creating a piece of legislation to regulate the way that artificial intelligence is used, I better not be using the term artificial intelligence frequently in that document. Maybe it's okay as a title of the piece of legislation. But because it's so unclear, I want to have regulation for chatbots, clearer legislation. I think that will just make it better and it will make it less exploitable. AI is not just one thing. And our quest led us through interesting and useful concepts, but no one term did a suitable job of picking out a natural kind of thing that is AI. None of them unified the purported examples of our early ostensive definition, and instead, we've got three of them. AI 1, the discipline of creating non-biological minds, AI 2, those non-biological minds, and AI 3, a colloquial term for new and smart, whatever that means, technology. But you gotta be really wary of this AI 3 term, even though it's the most frequently used. That vagueness will get you. Don't let it happen. Okay, the quest is over. I'm done. But this channel is not done. I've got a bunch of other series, but actually this series isn't entirely over either, because in the process of doing a bunch of research, I found a couple of folks that make the case that they actually have thinking software. And if they think the software is like actually thinking in like a genuine mind-like sense, then maybe I was wrong earlier when I said on Haugland's definition, on my AI2 definition, that AI doesn't exist. Maybe it really does. So let's take a look. Let's investigate those claims and see if it pans out. Spoiler, I don't think it's going to, but either it's going to, which would be cool, or it doesn't, and we're going to learn something about why it doesn't. Thanks so much for sticking with me for this last year and change. I feel like this is a really big moment in the channel because I'm like finishing up something that I started and initially put my mind to, and it's not close to the end because I'm so excited in all the other directions that we can go. So throw your comments below. Did you like my definition? Do you've got a better definition? Did I give short shrift to anything? Have a fabulous day, and I'll see you for the next one.